Hey everybody, welcome to what was supposed to be week 3 of Halloween in July. As we come closer and closer to the cosmic point of no return, I'm glad that I'm hurtling towards the abyss with all of you, particularly all the essential workers, be you a medical worker, food service, or logistical work. You know what my wife, who is currently working intense shift at an animal hospital, is getting for near constant back-to-back appointments, all while maintaining airtight safety protocols? Not one, but 2 water bottles that say I am essential on them. By the way, people who keep DMing me, hey, PlanetSide 2 has this thing now. You should come back to the game and make a video. You know what you have to do. This week we're going over the Outlast series, a franchise that's been delivering high-fidelity spookies through a camcorder since 2013. Outlast is a series of video games and comic books centered around the antics of the Murkoff Corporation, as told through the people who find the footage and found footage movies. Both Outlast games follow journalists who get some sort of tip about sketchy stuff going on in their area and quickly realize they are now in way over their head. Psychopaths attack and shenanigans ensue. I hope you brought enough batteries. Outlast is made by independent studio Red Barrels, who have self-published both Outlast titles. Red Barrels started out when a couple of cool guys from major studios in the Montreal region were like, hey, we've got this cool idea for a horror game, but there's no way our respective studios would greenlight something this raunchy. Let's make our own studio. And they did. And then they got some grants from the Canadian government, and 3 years later we got Outlast. And everyone thought it was pretty cool. Then they made another Outlast game and some comics, and people thought those were pretty cool too. So they're now still working on new games, because people think they're pretty cool. So how about that Outlast? Outlast came out in fall of 2013, right as Slender Mania was peaking, and did great as far as horror games go, thanks to a combination of being a high-fidelity horror game that didn't pull any punches, and also coming out right as Let's Plays were really starting to peak. Outlast follows the antics of investigative journalist Miles Upshur, who rolls up to a supposedly defunct asylum after receiving a tip that the Murkoff Corporation is doing some really messed up stuff there. Surely, wandering into a derelict mental facility owned by a corporation known for doing really sketchy stuff isn't a bad idea at all. MK Ultra ensues. Outlast's primary mechanic is the use of the camcorder that Upshur brought along with him, not only as a means of documenting all the horrible stuff that was going on in the Murkoff Black site that's masquerading as a mental health facility, but also as a means of seeing in the pitch darkness that is most of this facility. Your camera has an IR filter on it that lets you see where you otherwise couldn't in pitch dark rooms, and as a bonus, the bad guys can't really see your light because it's not a normal light, but it's infrared, which cannot be seen by the naked eye. Be careful though. The IR filter eats batteries like some sort of horror movie is going on, and spare batteries are a bit hard to find. You can also use it to zoom in a little, and in the event that you really need to look at something far off, it kinda gets the job done. And if the camera currently isn't doing you any favors at the moment, you can always just put it down because you'll see a little better because you're not looking through a lens and your eyes sort of see in the dark better than the camera without its IR filter. But remember, you can't get any notes if you don't have the camera pointed at all the atrocities going on. It's good to keep your camera up most of the time since that's how you get your notes or Miles's commentary on the scenery, on certain things you see, which is going to give you important information about what's going on at Mount Massive, the facility you're in. You'll be able to pick up classified files too that are literally just laying around and doing whatever, because protecting trade secrets is something that doesn't exist in the world of horror video games based on this and fear. We'll get to the contents of those documents later in the story section of this video. So what about the baddies? Well, you've got a lovely cast of crazies, including the mild-mannered twins, the arsonist, this guy here who's rather jovial about the entire situation, and Chris, the absolute unit of a man. Chris is going to be the guy who's doing most of the pursuing, and he's got a convenient set of chains on him around his arms and waist that jingle like he's some sort of murder Santa whenever he comes into a room. If you haven't figured it out yet, there's absolutely nothing you can do to really defend yourself against Chris, and your best bet for surviving is running, hiding, or just getting the heck out of wherever you are and moving on to the next poorly lit area where Chris will catch up to you in a few minutes. Hiding isn't a magic bullet though, as baddies will regularly check the underside of beds and in lockers, whether or not they've recently seen you, so you're gonna have to make sure you keep moving and make sure you break line of sight before hiding whenever possible, if you want to stand a chance of successfully eluding whoever the heck is chasing you around this time. Whenever you aren't recording atrocities and hiding from the psychically enhanced crazies, there's a good bit of shimmying around and climbing up on sketchy ledges, which can get pretty tense, especially since you can and will fail certain leaps of faith, and you will die if you aren't careful. Also, prepare to spend a good bit of time looking around for exposed vents in the ceiling so you can progress, and also scrounging for batteries. So how about the spookies? Well, Outlast is a little blend of the tropes of found footage, the lunatics running the asylum, and scientists trying to play God to disastrous results. And it works together really well. Where Amnesia works for a slow build and Slender was a big fan of a loud noise going off right as the monster jumps in front of you while still doing an okay job of building tension, Outlast has no time for the slow burn and just wants to mess you up as much as possible. No punches are pulled. Within the first 10 minutes, you've got gore, giant monsters sneaking up behind you, screamers, and a religious nutjob insisting on showing you something. Yeah, it's gonna be one of those evenings, isn't it? Where other games use the selective absence of light to set the mood, Outlast takes that up to 11 too, like it does with everything else, by having the complete absence of light in a lot of areas, forcing Miles to crawl around in the dark, occasionally switching on the IR filter to get an idea of where he is. Like seriously, this game is dark. For all of you right now watching this video, thanks to YouTube's compression, I can just put black screen right here, and you honest to God couldn't tell if I didn't bother to put a clip in this part of the timeline, or if I just put the camera down in one of Outlast's dark sections. It's that dark in this game. This gives me a lot of fear energy, as it's doing that thing where your access to light is very limited, so you gotta creep around in the unknown, only giving yourself a few seconds of vision every now and again to see where you're going, which just jacks up the tension even more whenever audio cues like Chris's chains come into play. Outlast likes it dark, and often light sources are your only hint as to where the heck you're supposed to be going right now. This very much follows the idea of less is more in horror storytelling, but I gotta say, what you do see is really well done, and the textures and set design of Outlast are some of the finest I've seen in horror games of the time period. Everything feels all rusted and nasty, all grungy-like, as you creep deeper and deeper into the Mount Massive Asylum, and the place is literally falling apart. So, what exactly happens in Outlast? Spoiler warnings, by the way. Well, as we previously established, investigative reporter Miles Upshur gets a tip about a mental facility run by the Murkoff Corporation somewhere in Colorado. That's actually some sort of black site. But when he rolls up, it's like there's no one home. Really, there's not even a guard at the gatehouse being like, "Hey, appointments only, jerk." Miles gets in and sees that it's quite literally a case of the lunatics running the asylum, and this is definitely not a mental health facility anymore. Through snagged documents, Upshur learns that presumably dead Nazi scientist Dr. Warnicki is heading up some experiments on patients in an operation called Project Walrider, which is based on an insane combination of scraps of MK Ultra, Operation Paperclips, and bits of German folklore to create some sort of psychic lucid dream state through what's called the morphogenic engine. Early on, Miles is confronted by Chris Walker, who initially he thinks is the end product of the morphogenic engine, until listening in on some of Chris's insane ramblings and realizing that whatever Murkoff is doing here, Chris is actually trying to stop whatever it is from getting out. Miles also comes across Father Martin, who thinks all this is some sort of religious experience, and Martin is kind enough to leave Miles a trail of literal blood for him to follow if he wants to figure out what Murkoff is really doing. This annoys Chris. Miles finally learns about all the wild psi-ops stuff when he gets to the secret black site underneath the asylum, but not before having former executive Chris Traeger try to sell him the dream. There, he meets Dr. Warnicki, who asks him to disable the Walrider, a subject who is successfully exposed to the morphogenic engine, and has been the literal ghost thing attacking him and any of the cleanup crews that try to come in and cover up the Mount Massive facility. The Walrider deals with Chris just before he gets to you, and then you deal with the Walrider just before he gets to Dr. Warnicki, and then Dr. Warnicki calls a cleanup crew to deal with you before you get to the presses. The end. This all took just a smidge under 5 hours to complete, but it was definitely a wild 5 hours. Then we got the story DLC for Outlast, the Whistleblower, which follows the events that lead up to the game proper and then a little bit after the fact. You play as a coder for Murkoff, who has helped compile the morphogenic engine into something that Murkoff could use on people, and you're having some serious second thoughts about it, so you send an email to somebody you think can do something about it. Too bad you get caught almost immediately, and they throw you into the morphogenic engine to get rid of you. Lucky for you, the containment breach that left the asylum in the state that it is happens, and you get out. The Whistleblower runs you only about 2 hours, but it's a wild ride for the most part. Where the main game has a handful of recurring enemies, and the Whistleblower, it's kind of a tour of individual baddies that won't really show up again once you've eluded them. There's Circular Saw Guy, Chris shows up for a bit, there's the one-man redneck family, and Mr. Horny on Main. Where Outlast was shocking, the Whistleblower is outright gnarly. And I'm pretty sure I can't show like half of this, so expect a lot of cats over this stuff. The Whistleblower does pretty much lead right up to the main events of Outlast and then what happens immediately after. And then it sort of sets up for sequels or at least an Outlast expanded universe. Sorry about not showing you any relevant clips here, but I have to admit I wasn't able to finish the Whistleblower because I had some really bad luck with a somewhat rare glitch right at the end where Mr. Gluskin will spawn in twice as he tries to get you, and it's pretty much a guaranteed reset since one of him is bad enough as it is. And I got this 3 times at the end of the game, and the latter 2 were back-to-back occurrences. Hey folks, so this is usually where the anti-sponsor would go, but we recently hit a Patreon goal which now guarantees 1 cooking segment a month, so I removed this video's anti-sponsorship and I'm replacing it with a recipe I've cobbled together over the past couple months of quarantine that I like to call the Idiot's Carbonara. It's called that because you'd either have to be an idiot to think it's an actual carbonara, or you're like me and too much of an idiot to properly temper the eggs for carbonara, so you just make this instead. It's got that creamy, rich, porky taste that carbonara does, but it's significantly easier to make and is considerably more of a low-rent dish. It's essentially cacio e pepe with bacon and a bit of oil, which I guess would make it cacio e pepe olio, and actually yes, this is literally cacio e pepe with oil and bacon. So first we gotta get everything in order before we start firing up the stove. Before you use everything you need to make this dish, your first order of business is to start heating up that pasta water for a boil and cooking up your bacon. I'm choosing not to salt my pasta water here as the bacon and Parmesan cheese are salty enough as it is, but you do you. I'm also spraying down this pan, so it's a janky old piece of crap, frankly, and I didn't want to use my second non-stick pan for the bacon since it'd be hard to frame free pans on the stove. Deal with it. Okay, you're gonna see here that mine is a little on the undercooked side, but that's on purpose. For one, it's gonna cook a little more later on in the recipe when we introduce it to the pasta, and you're also gonna want it just a little bit chewy or at least soft enough so that a fork can easily pierce it for the eatings. Cook as much bacon as you want, and then set it aside on the cutting board under maybe some paper towels or something so that it can drain properly. I did about a dozen strips, which in hindsight was a bit much versus the amount of pasta I had. Play around with your bacon to cheese to pasta ratio all you want, because I'm not your cardiologist. Once your bacon is all nice and dried off, cut it into 1-inch long pieces and set it aside. Then scrub off your saucepan real quick before putting a splash of olive oil on it. For reference here, I use way too much. By the time this is all done, your pasta water should be good and boiling, so long as you remember to cover the pot. Okay, it's showtime. Stuff the pasta into the boiling water and set a short timer, and I mean short, like 6.5 minutes tops. You want this to get al dente and still as like toothsome as possible because it's going to continue to cook as we make the cheesy sauce. It's kind of a tightrope here because you want to cook it for long enough to get the water all nice and starchy, but you also want it to be as firm as possible coming out of the pot because it's going to cook more later. Alrighty, timer's going off. Before you dump out all that pasta water into the colander, take your heat resistant measuring cup and get yourself a nice cup full of that starchy water. Set that aside and then strain that sucker. Turn the saucepan on to medium-low heat and slide all that pasta into the pan, giving it a good mixing around to get the pasta nice and coated with olive oil. And then we start the fun part, making the sauce. Now, what you're gonna do here is start pouring in a little bit of that starchy water, giving it a mix, then you start sprinkling on a bit of that powdered Parmesan, mix it again until there's no more visible chunks of Parmesan, and then you start grinding pepper over that bad boy and mix some more. You're gonna repeat this process until you've got a nice creamy sauce all around your pasta, or you just run out of the pasta water to use. This is a very forgiving process, and if you accidentally put in too much of one of these things, it can be balanced out by adding some more of the others. Just remember that less is more here, and that while eating one of those rehydrated cheese clumps is fabled to give you immense strength, it will also shorten your life by 1 year. Once you've got your pasta and sauce where you want it, you can either add in the bacon and give it one last mix if you really want that bacony flavor throughout, or you can just top the pasta with the bacon if that's more your speed. If you don't like the color or presentation of how this is, you can always cook your bacon a little more well done done to give it a bit more color, or opt to add in some herbs and vegetables to make the dish really pop visually. This random cooking segment is not brought to you by any crappy mobile games or sketchy applications for your computer, but instead entirely through fan funding. I refuse any and all questionable sponsorships because I get all the support from you at patreon.com/charlatanwonder, where you can support this channel and keep the terrible mobile game ads away for less than the price of a 6-pack of kazoos on Amazon. Although, I gotta be honest here, I'm not gonna fault you if you spring for those kazoos. I mean, look at, you get 6 of them and a ton of reads. Imagine the possibilities here. What you choose to do with your money is your own though, and let's get back to Outlast, because this has been going on for a hot minute now. Outlast saw a proper sequel in 2017, which, considering the size of Red Barrels as a studio, is a pretty good turnaround between games. Before we get into the sequel though, I'd be missed if I didn't talk about the Outlast comic book series, Outlast, the Murkoff account, which follows the antics of a pair of, loss prevention specialists as they try to clean up Murkoff's messes parallel to the events of the game. As you get closer to them in the stories, you start to get the feeling that maybe they're the real monsters instead of whatever Project Walrider churned out this week. The series started in late 2016 as a means to get the hype train for Outlast 2 going, and ran a full 5 issues plus an epilogue episode that tied up the loose ends after Outlast 2 was released. I'd definitely say it's what I'd call stylized, and for what the creators had to go with and go on, I'd say it's pretty good too. While most comics have a whole team of people for the pictures alone, the Murkoff account only has a single writer and a single artist who do a very good job of capturing the look and feel of the Outlast games. The best part is that all of these comics are available for free on Red Barrels' website, and I'd say they're worth checking out if you like Outlast or indie comics. Back to Outlast 2. Outlast 2 follows reporter couple Lynn and Blank Langerman, with the player taking the role of Blake and his camera as the couple rent a helicopter in order to investigate a secluded town in Arizona that's linked to some very disturbing murders. The chopper inexplicably goes down, and the Langermans are separated as they come into contact with Sullivan Knott and his cult in the remote settlement of Temple Gate. Meanwhile, both of them are having flashbacks to their time in Catholic school where their friend supposedly committed suicide. Crazy cult antics ensue as the Langermans learn about Temple Gate, the cult's perception of the coming apocalypse, and that it's not a cult, but plural cults, as Sullivan's followers have splintered off into 2 other factions against the cult proper. Outlast 2's gameplay is everything I like in a sequel. It takes the original ideas and expands upon them. Blake's camera is really beefed up compared to Miles' hand cam, and you can now use it to track baddies through walls with a stereo microphone. Stuff you could do in the previous games is now more fine-tuned. You can peek out of the closets a little to see if it's safe, and not all of them will have convenient locker slats for you to peek out of. There are new hiding places that are underwater, which adds a new element of trying to wait out the bad guys, and you can go full prone on top of crouching to really get in there or to slide through tight spaces. Also, you now have an actual health system which lets you heal yourself, and you don't just magically get better once the bad guys are gone. Healing takes time, and you'll need to find bandages that are laying around in first aid kits or literally wherever, as I've seen from this place. And I don't trust any of these medical supplies, especially after what I saw in the forest. Whatever, at least it mostly stops the bleeding. The real kicker here is that everything is super immersive. Your menu is now you just looking down at your camera's display, and you can physically see how many batteries and bandages you have instead of getting a number by looking down at your vest pockets. Notes that you discover are no longer viewed in an in-game menu or magically teleported into Miles Upshure's personal pocket dimension, but now when you find them, you physically pick up the note and use your camera to take a picture of them and you review it later. Speaking of capturing clips, you now have to hold the camera's focus on an object for a certain amount of time if you want to properly record the event, and when you review the clips, Blake will have magically ADR'd whatever you just recorded with the information that you would have previously gotten as a bit of flavor text in the menus. Most of the game takes place in various parts of the Temple Gate settlement as you make your way through the plot, or alternatively in a very realistic hallucination of the Catholic school that the Langermans went to growing up. Outlast 2 likes to mess with you in any way it can, and while most of the game is pretty straightforward, There are a good number of segments that left me looking up a walkthrough only for me to realize I'm a big fat dummy pants, since it seems the game always does at least kinda hint at what you're supposed to do, although sometimes it's really subtle and you gotta think fast while there's a monster actively chasing you. I got wrecked in those school sections a lot more than I'd like to admit. As far as the scenes and the spookies go, something that I noticed is that Temple Gate looks a lot cleaner than Mount Massive, which makes sense. Mount Massive was literally a condemned asylum, whereas Temple Gate, while not exactly up to code, is a place where people are actively living and trying to make out a life for themselves. This includes agriculture and living in the woods, both of which make for some very good chase scenes. Running through the cornfields is pretty intense, since while it's easy to break the line of sight, every little movement you make makes noise. And the effects of the cultists waving around their flashlight makes for some really tense moments while you're prone and hoping that you've lost them. There's a lot of tense moments where you have to crawl through tight spaces where you're totally helpless, and if someone finds you, thanks to the prone thing, you're done. Enemies are still mostly human, but some are pretty far gone thanks to the outbreak of disease, and the heretics are pretty out there themselves. Outlast 2 seems to follow a similar style of monsters attacking you that the Whistleblower did, where each major segment of the game, you'll have one particular big bad chasing you around until you can get out of their territory. There's nothing wrong about that, but I have to admit I sorta missed recurring antagonists like Chris somehow catching me wherever I went and relentlessly pursuing me throughout the game, although Marta kinda does that. Outlast 2 instead chooses horribly shocking imagery as the recurring antagonist, and holy moly, it makes the game hard to get through. Now, I'm not too squeamish myself, but the best way to describe the amount of shocking imagery in Outlast 2 compared to the first game is, you know that one scene where Traeger gets his hands on you and decides that you don't need all 10 fingers? Well, there's something like that every 20 or 30 minutes in Outlast 2. And it's not always mutilation per se, but Outlast 2 certainly cut the brakes on the grotesque, and I personally could only play the game for 45 minutes tops at a time. However, I know that some of you, that's exactly what you're looking for, so to each their own. Personally, I say this is a bit too much, as I feel it devalues the big scares and dulls your senses after a while because you're just so used to watching your character get assaulted or mutilated for the umpteenth time that it kind of loses its luster. Where Outlast did throw everything at you, it gave you enough time for your heart rate to go down before starting to jack things up again. Outlast 2 is a constant barrage of horrible stuff that, at least in my case, burnt me out pretty fast and resulted in me needing to take breaks from the game after less than an hour if I wanted to keep on getting the full effect. Like seriously, where in the first game randos would only occasionally attack you or jump at you, leading to like tense moments where you gotta creep by wondering if this dude's gonna try to attack you or not, in Outlast 2, once you're past the starting area, pretty much everyone is going to try and stab you or something, and there's almost no respite from the chaos. Again, to each their own though. I know that how Outlast 2 does its scares is exactly what some of you are looking for. The story in Outlast 2 is considerably more complicated than the first game, thanks to it being not only nearly twice as long as the first game, but also how major elements of the story are divulged in those comics we talked about earlier. Spoiler warning, by the way. On the surface level, it starts out as the Langermans flying in to investigate what happened after the very suspicious death of a pregnant Jane Doe they come across, and they come to Sullivan Knopf's town, Temple Gate. Temple Gate is centered around Knopf and his followers who call themselves the Testament of the New Ezekiel. Okay, major spoilers from here on out, you've been warned. Not all is well in Temple Gate though, as Knopf, who originally received his prophetic visions from TV static, allegedly receives another vision that the Antichrist is going to be born into his flock. And of course, he thinks the best option is for him to have his cult kill literally every child that is born into his cult going forward. This makes things more complicated once we learn a few other truths about Murkoff. Not that I'll capture Lynn after the crash and claim she's going to be the mother of the Antichrist. But before they could do something about it, her and Blake escape, only to be captured again by the heretics, a splinter faction of Templegate who lost their faith. Blake is left to his own devices and learns through possibly the only friendly person in all of Templegate that Lynn is being kept with the heretics in the old mines. He tries to make his way over there, but of course something happens, and a freak storm of locusts knock him off a bridge where he meets the Skull, a group of diseased Ezekiel followers who have been cast out for their sickness by Knopf himself, which is ironic considering that Knopf's own philandering is what gave them their sickness in the first place. While all of this is going on, Blake keeps noticing these massive flashes that incapacitate pretty much everyone but him, and he also keeps finding himself in a memory of his old school where his childhood friend Jessica Gray seems to want to take the fear route of having you discover a truth about the past by means of mass hallucination. It turns out that she didn't commit suicide and was actually killed by one Father Loudermilch in order to make sure that no one knew that he had been abusing her. This is told to Blake through creepy school flashbacks with body horror monsters and something that looks a lot like the Walrider running around just outside your field of vision. There's also a few out-of-place Murkoff logos here and there for some reason, and some dubious radio towers in the distance that might have something to do with that. Blake finally makes it to the mines, where after a bit of a struggle he finds Lynn and the heretics performing a ritual to have her give birth to the Antichrist. Look, I can't show any of this. I don't know why you're surprised. The Ezekiel followers catch up to them, and the heretics are pretty much wiped out, but not before Lynn gives birth. There's something off about the baby, though. Possibly to do with how Lynn wasn't preggers a few hours ago. This all ends after a confrontation with Noth himself, and everyone dying at what looks like the end of the world. However, in the comics, there was an epilogue where it seems that the world is not undergoing an apocalyptic event, and it turns out those radio towers were broadcasting the morphogenic engine over the airwaves. Murkoff was experimenting with mind control via these airwaves, and using the effects of the engine's crazy by proxy to see how effectively they could spread the effects of the engine. This also is the voice of God that Sullivan Knopf thought he heard. The big storm that happened later in the game was actually the Walrider possessing a colony of ants to destroy the radio towers broadcasting the engine, which caused the signal to go crazy. As previously established in the first Outlast game, the reason why there were no female patients or staff at Mount Massive was because the morphogenics engine's crazy by proxy manifests in women rapidly gestating fictitious pregnancies, which often leaves the victims dead upon the quote-unquote birth. Lynn and many other of the women in Temple Gate are victim to this effect thanks to the radio towers, and that doesn't exactly help with Knopf's "the Antichrist can't come from my flock if we kill literally every child that's born here" doctrine. After Outlast 2 and the epilogue comic, we're left wondering what wacky shenanigans the Murkoff Company will get into in Outlast 3. So where does that leave us now? Well, until recently, nowhere, but as of the PC Gaming Show a couple months back, Red Barrels revealed Outlast Trials, which is going to be a multiplayer experience. From the information given, it's not going to be a sequel, but a prequel, as it takes place in the early 70s, presumably when Murkoff had more access to MK Ultra stuff. It was initially thought that it was going to be some sort of VR title, as all the player characters seemed to have some sort of headset on, but Red Barrels cleared that up by addressing the rumors and saying the game was going to be for a traditional control and display scheme. Now, I'm personally more of team horror is better done as a single player experience, and my main example to cite is how The Forest goes from spooky survival horror in single player to Minecraft clone number 2348 when played with friends. But since all that we know is that it will have multiplayer, I'm reserving my judgment until we actually get to play it. No matter how you slice it though, Red Barrels has an excellent track record and they know what they're doing, so I trust them to treat the Outlast property well. Then there's the inevitable Outlast 3. Now, nothing's been overtly said about it despite it having its own section on the Outlast Wikipedia page, but I'm gonna assume that it's happening sometime at some point. And of course, we know literally nothing about a game that isn't even confirmed to exist yet, but I'd be very surprised if a third mainline title in the Outlast series did not materialize in the next 5 years. As for my guesses to what it's about, well, I'm thinking that Simon Peacock from the Whistleblower and the comics will play a more prominent role, and that maybe the Pauls from the comics will be involved too. Heck, maybe the plot of Outlast 3 will have you playing as Paul Marion being made to work for Simon by using his insider access to Murkoff to expose the company's shady dealings. That's just a wild guess though. So that's Outlast as we know it so far. I want to thank all of you so much for your support, and again, I apologize for this being so late, and in case you didn't watch the big update video, my wife got a call out of the blue telling her that she got accepted into a graduate school that we had initially written off after being told there was no more room on the wait list for her, and we'd already made plans to move in with the rest of my family in Texas towards the end of the year. This all has changed, of course, and now has given me a ticking clock of just a little over a month to cancel all our previous moving plans and to arrange an entire new life for ourselves in an entirely different part of the country, all in time for my wife to be there when orientation comes. Lucky for us, almost all of that is now taken care of, and the rest is just waiting for a week out to start packing our stuff and then driving across the country. I'm gonna try to have Penumbra out before the big move, but I'm sorry I can't make any promises on that one. I'm amazed at all the support you guys have given me over at patreon.com/charlatanwonder, and I'd like to take the moment to give an extra special thanks to all $10 patrons: Alysanera, The Shogun, Niles D, Yannick, Caleb P, Meme, Schlingding, Jacob M, Denegator, Karlski, Chili Moonbuds, OMG Ponies, French Toast, and McFluffers. And a big hello and welcome to the new patrons: Joey B, Aaron H, a welcome back to Editorial Entertainment, Maria H, Noesian, Sir Tristan, Forrest A, Schlingding, Skullfox, Skookicon, John L, Ray, Mishappinape, Jessica B, Eli Weaver, to Jared, John, The Asian Shoemaker, Mehmet, Caleb P, Yannick Z, Soviet D, Turtle, Niles D, and The Shogun. I hope I got all of you. Thank you all so much for watching, and in the meantime, please stay safe, stay inside, wash your hands, wear your mask, and enjoy this cat video. Risk. Look what we got, look what we got. Totally didn't just film this and forgot to hit record. Look what it does. You wanna play the kazoo? I'm gonna play the kazoo. Kazoo. I'm a terrible cat dad. Oh look, my wife is coming home. She's going to hate me forever because I bought kazoos, and I will not stop playing them. Saucy boy! Mommy doesn't hate us for buying kazoos, and now we both play kazoos.